On our 15th anniversary, my wife said, "I've been sleeping with another man for 2 years. I'm leaving you." I just smiled, raised my glass, and said nothing. But when the door opened later, everything she planned collapsed. She leaned across the candlelit table, looked me dead in the eyes on our 15th anniversary, and told me she'd been sleeping with another man for 2 years. 2 years. She said it the way you'd announced you were switching phone carriers. Calm, prepared, like she'd rehearsed every word in the mirror that morning. And maybe she had, because what came out of her mouth next was polished, deliberate, designed to wound. "I'm leaving you. Declan, I've already made my decision. I just thought you deserved to hear it from me directly." The restaurant around us kept moving, silverware clinking, low jazz from the speakers in the corner, a couple nearby laughing at something on a phone. Nobody had any idea that 15 years of marriage were being incinerated at Table 7 of Josephine, one of Nashville's finest restaurants, right on Rutledge Hill, where we'd had our first real date. She picked that place on purpose. I know that now. And here's the part that changed everything. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't grip the table and beg her to reconsider. I smiled. I picked up my glass of Bordeaux, held it across the table toward her, and I said, "Then I wish you nothing but happiness, Fiona." The look on her face in that moment, the confusion, the crack in the composure she'd built for weeks, maybe months. I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. But what happened next? When the door to Josephine opened 40 minutes later, and someone walked through it that Fiona never expected to see, that's when her entire world collapsed around her, and she had done it entirely to herself. My name is Declan Marsh. I'm 45 years old. I've spent the better part of 2 decades working as a private investigator and security consultant here in Nashville, Tennessee. I've helped corporations find stolen assets, helped attorneys build cases, helped people uncover truths they were simultaneously desperate to know and terrified of confirming. I am, professionally speaking, a man who finds things out, which makes what happened to me in my own marriage, in my own home, in my own life, something I still have to reckon with every single day. Because the man who spent his career seeing through other people's lies spent 15 years completely blind to his own wife's. If you're new here, take a second and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below telling me whether you saw this ending coming, because I promise you, you didn't. And if this story hits you somewhere familiar, hit that like button. It helps more people find us. Now, let me tell you everything. Before I get into the details of what happened that night, I want to say something about the nature of working in this profession for as long as I have. When you're a private investigator for 20 years, you develop a very particular relationship with the truth. You learn that truth is rarely dramatic in the way people expect it to be. It doesn't arrive in a single explosive moment of revelation. It accumulates. It arrives in small increments, in details that seem unimportant individually and devastating in aggregate. A charge on a credit card, a different brand of soap in the guest bathroom, the way someone pauses before answering a simple question that shouldn't require a pause at all. You learn to read patterns. You learn to hold observations without immediately assigning meaning to them, because meaning assigned too early distorts everything that follows. You learn patience that most people would find unsettling. And you learn, most importantly, that people who are hiding something are always more visible than they believe themselves to be. I knew all of that. I had known it professionally for 2 decades, and it still happened to me. That is the thing I want you to hold on to as I tell this story. Not as a story about betrayal, though it is that. Not as a story about revenge, though some people have called it that and I've stopped correcting them. I want you to hold on to it as a story about the cost of choosing not to see something you already on some level see, because that's the real story. And it starts long before a restaurant on Rutledge Hill. I met Fiona Gallagher in the summer of 2008 at a charity event for Hands On Nashville, one of those volunteer coordination organizations that does real work in the city. I was there with a colleague. She was there with her sister Rosalind, who ran a small non-profit out of East Nashville. Fiona was 30 at the time. Dark red hair cut just below the jaw. Green eyes that caught the light from across the room and made you feel irrationally like she was already in on something you hadn't figured out yet. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveled frequently, was brilliant at reading people. That last part, I would later understand, was not incidental. We dated for 14 months before I proposed at Centennial Park near the Parthenon replica on a Sunday morning when the park was nearly empty. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence. The wedding was at the Hermitage Hotel downtown, 64 guests. Her parents flew in from Knoxville. My brother Garrett drove down from Louisville with his kids. Rosalind gave a toast that made half the room cry. For the first decade, I can honestly say we were good. Not perfect. Nobody is perfect. But we were solid. We had a home in the Sylvan Park neighborhood, a 3-bedroom craftsman on a tree-lined street where we knew our neighbors' names, and had a standing Saturday morning routine at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. We never had children. That was a conversation we had early and revisited often, and ultimately agreed wasn't the path for us. We built a life that was quieter than most, more intentional, full of long dinners and travel and work that both of us cared about. I traveled for cases sometimes, long stretches away from home, especially when corporate clients needed on-site security assessments in other cities. Fiona traveled for her pharmaceutical territory, which covered Tennessee, northern Georgia, and the western edge of Kentucky. We were both frequently gone, and we had both accepted that as the rhythm of our marriage. I think that rhythm is what made it so easy for her to hide. The first signs were small enough that I almost didn't register them as signs at all. In the fall of 2 years ago, Fiona started coming home from her sales trips quieter than usual. Not sad, not withdrawn, just contained in a way that felt new, like she was holding something close that she hadn't shared yet. I asked her once, maybe 3 weeks into noticing it, whether she was all right. She looked at me across our kitchen island and said she was just tired. The quarter had been brutal. Management was pushing aggressive targets. She was covering for a colleague who'd taken medical leave. All plausible, all true. I'd later verify, but none of it the real answer. I want to be honest about something. I am a private investigator. I notice things for a living, and I missed this entirely for 2 years. That fact lives in me like a splinter. I can't fully get to, but I've sat with it long enough now to understand why. You don't run surveillance on the people you love. Or rather, you shouldn't have to. The skills I use professionally are tools I deployed on behalf of people who already suspected something was wrong. I never gave myself permission to suspect Fiona. I trusted her, and I believe that trust was not naive. It was chosen. It was the thing that made our marriage a marriage and not a monitored arrangement. But trust, as I learned, can be exploited by someone who knows exactly how much of it they've been given. The second sign came in January of the following year. I was reviewing our shared credit card statement, something I did monthly as a matter of financial habit, and I noticed 2 charges at a hotel in Murfreesboro, the Hilton Garden Inn on Old Fort. 2 nights in November. We hadn't taken a trip together in November. I remembered November clearly. I'd been in Atlanta for a corporate security audit for most of that month. I almost asked Fiona about the charges. I had the question formed in my mind on the tip of my tongue one morning over coffee. But then she got a call from a doctor's office about a prescription renewal, and the moment dissolved and I told myself there was probably a simple explanation. She'd worked in Murfreesboro. She stayed over sometimes for early morning appointments. I knew this. I'd known this for years. I put it away. I moved on. I didn't go back. And that, I think, was the last moment I had the chance to change how the story ended. Our 15th anniversary fell on a Thursday in March. Fiona made the reservation herself at Josephine, which had been meaningful to us since that first real date. She even texted me the week before to confirm I'd blocked the evening. She sent a little blue heart emoji, the way you do when you're happy or when you're so deep in a performance that the gestures have become reflexive. I wore the charcoal suit she'd bought me for my birthday 2 years before. I got there 5 minutes early and ordered sparkling water and waited. She arrived looking beautiful. She always looked beautiful. That has never been the question. We talked about easy things. Her quarterly review, which had gone well. A case I'd wrapped up that involved a missing business document situation for a media company over in Brentwood. She asked about my brother Garrett, and I asked about Rosalind, who had recently moved from East Nashville to a new apartment in Germantown. The food arrived. We ate, and then somewhere between the main course and whatever was coming after it, Fiona set down her fork, looked at me directly, and began, "I need to tell you something, Declan, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I remember the specific quality of the light at that moment, the way the candle on the table caught the gold in her earrings, how the noise of the restaurant seemed to contract slightly, the way your hearing sharpens when your body knows something is coming before your mind has caught up. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, "for 2 years. I'm not going to pretend it was an accident or that I didn't know what I was doing. I made a choice. I kept making it. And I think we both deserve honesty about where things stand." She had a lot more prepared after that. Details she'd decided to share, details she'd decided not to, a version of our marriage that she offered as justification. We'd grown apart. I was frequently absent. She'd felt invisible. She'd felt unheard. The story was coherent. It had probably taken her a long time to construct it. I listened. I let her finish. I kept my face calm the way I've trained myself over years to keep my face calm in rooms where information is being delivered. Because the moment you react is the moment you stop learning. When she was done, she looked at me, waiting for the reaction she'd prepared for. And I lifted my glass. "Fiona," I said, "thank you for telling me directly. I mean that. I wish you well. I genuinely do." She stared at me. "That's it. What were you expecting?" "I don't know." "Not this." She looked almost frustrated. "Aren't you going to ask who it is?" "No," I said. "I don't think I need to." The confusion on her face was something I had not anticipated enjoying as much as I did. She had rehearsed reactions to grief, to anger, to pleading. She had no script for this. We sat in that suspension for a moment. She signaled for the check. I said I was going to have dessert. She looked at me again like I was performing something she didn't understand. And that's when the door to Josephine opened. I need to back up. Because the evening that happened at that restaurant didn't begin at the restaurant. It began 6 weeks earlier in my office on Charlotte Avenue, where I'd finally allowed myself to look at something I should have looked at a long time ago. The credit card statement. Not from January. A more recent one. There was a charge for a hotel in Clarksville. 2 nights Fiona had told me she was visiting a college friend that weekend. I remembered nodding. I remembered making my own plans with a former colleague instead. I sat at my desk for a long time after I noticed the charge. And then I did what I do. I started working. Within 4 days, I had a picture I could not unsee. The man's name was Bryce Calloway. He was 39 years old, divorced, and worked as a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical distribution company based out of Memphis with regular business in Nashville and across Middle Tennessee. He and Fiona had likely met at an industry conference. Their paths crossed professionally, which is why she'd never had to construct elaborate stories. The legitimate framework of her work life had provided all the cover she needed. I found his profile through professional networks. I pulled additional records through my investigative tools. I could have hired someone else to document it further, but I chose not to. This was not a case. This was my marriage. And there is a line I believe in, even in my own life, between knowing what you need to know and building a dossier on your wife. What I knew was enough. I knew he existed. I knew roughly how long it had been going on. I knew that the version of herself Fiona had been building in private for 2 years was one in which I was no longer part of the architecture, and I knew one more thing. Through a contact at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, someone I'd worked alongside on a white-collar case 2 years prior, I learned that Bryce Calloway was currently the subject of a federal civil fraud investigation. His company had been billing false distribution contracts to hospital networks in 3 states. The FBI field office in Memphis had opened a formal case 8 months prior. It was not yet public knowledge. Fiona, I was quite certain, had no idea. Now, here is where I have to be precise about what I did and what I chose not to do. Because this story is not about revenge. I want to be clear about that. What I did because I needed to make one decision, whether to leave my marriage quietly or to let the evening that was already going to happen become something Fiona would carry with her long after it was over. I called Rosalind. Rosalind Gallagher Moore had been a constant in my life for 15 years. She and I had always been genuinely close. The kind of in-law relationship that's rare, built on actual affection and mutual respect rather than obligation. She texted me on my birthday without being reminded. She'd called me twice during a particularly hard stretch of a case just to check in because Fiona had mentioned I seemed burdened. When Fiona and I traveled, Rosalind was the one who watered the plants and brought in the mail without being asked. She is one of those people who anchors things, who holds the shape of a family or a friendship together, not through any grand gesture, but through reliable presence and the kind of attention that makes people feel seen. I've known a few people like that in my life, and I've always understood them to be rare. I met her for coffee at Barista Parlor on 8th Avenue 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner. I told her what I knew. I watched her face move through disbelief into anger, and then into something sadder and more permanent. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough," I said. "I need you to know before it ends. And I need to ask you something. Rosalind knew about Bryce Calloway before I did. She had known for 6 months. Fiona had told her in confidence, believing that sisterhood would hold the secret. Rosalind had hated it, had pushed back, had urged Fiona to end it or to tell me, had threatened twice to say something herself and back down because she didn't want to be the one to detonate my life. When I told her about the federal investigation, she was quiet for a long time. "She doesn't know." I said. "No." Rosalind said, "She absolutely does not know. I'm not going to use it against her," I said carefully. "But I think someone who loves her should tell her. And I think it should happen in a way that makes it clear what she walked away from to be with a man who is about to face serious federal consequences." When Rosalind asked, I told her about the anniversary dinner. I told her when and where, and I asked if she would come. She came back to table 7 at Josephine. The door opened at 8:47 in the evening. Rosalind walked in wearing a coat she'd bought specifically for the occasion, or so she told me later, because she wanted to feel armored for it. She'd called ahead and spoken with the hostess. She knew where we were sitting. When Fiona saw her sister approaching the table, she went still in the way a person goes still when their brain cannot rapidly construct a framework for what is happening. "Rosalind, what are you doing here?" Rosalind sat down in the empty chair at our table without being invited. She looked at me, and something passed between us that was calm and sad and finished. Then she looked at her sister. "I love you, Fiona." She said, "You're my sister, and I love you, and I have spent 6 months keeping a secret that was slowly making me someone I don't want to be. Rosalind, don't. Bryce Calloway's company is under federal fraud investigation. Rosalind said the FBI, Memphis field office, 8 months ago. They opened a case. He's been billing false contracts across 3 states. It is not public yet, but it will be. And when it is, everyone connected to him will be looked at." The color left Fiona's face in stages. I watched it go. "He's not who you think he is." Rosalind continued. "I've been trying to tell you to end it for months. I should have said this months ago. I should have said it out loud to both of you instead of trying to protect everyone from everything. I'm done protecting something that shouldn't be protected. Fiona turned to me. I don't know what she expected to find on my face. I kept it even. Did you arrange this? She asked. I told your sister the truth. I said. She made her own decision about what to do with it. Declan, you told me you're leaving. I said, I'm not trying to stop you. I'm not trying to hurt you. But you should know what you're leaving for. Fiona, that's just fair. The restaurant moved around us. The jazz from the corner, silverware clinking. A couple nearby whose evening had nothing to do with ours. Fiona picked up her wine glass, set it down again without drinking. She looked at her sister. She looked at me. And then she looked at the table. And she stayed that way for a long time. I want to describe the drive home from Josephine that night because it matters. I sat in my car in the parking structure on Rutledge Hill for about 20 minutes after leaving the restaurant. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the dark and let the evening settle into me the way cold air settles into a room when a window's been left open all night. You don't feel it all at once. You feel it gradually, the temperature changing, the draft reaching you from farther and farther away until the whole room has shifted. 15 years is a long time, even when you've known for 6 weeks that it's ending, even when you've done the work of preparing yourself intellectually for what is coming. The actual ending lands differently than the anticipation of it. Fiona had said what she said. Rosalind had said what she said. Bryce Calloway's name had been placed on the table between us like an object, and now I was sitting in a parking structure in downtown Nashville at 9:00 on a Thursday night, and my marriage was over. I thought about the craftsmen on the tree-lined street in Sylvan Park, whether the hydrangeas I'd planted along the fence that spring would come in well, and who would be there to see them if they did. I thought about the coffee shop 2 blocks away, and the specific table by the window, where Fiona and I had spent more Saturday mornings than I could count, reading different books, passing sections of the paper back and forth, saying very little. I thought about whether I had been happy there, or whether I had simply been comfortable, and whether I had ever clearly understood the difference. Then I started the car and drove home and made myself eat something because that's what you do. You make yourself do the practical things. You keep the machinery of living running because it gives you somewhere to put your hands while your mind figures out what comes next. There is a version of this story I could tell where I am the hero, the wronged husband who outmaneuvered the woman who betrayed him, the investigator who saw through the lie, the man who walked away from 15 years with his head up and his dignity intact. I don't entirely believe that version because it leaves out what the months after that dinner actually looked like. The divorce was filed in April and finalized by October. Fiona hired an attorney and so did I, and the process was what it was, thorough and exhausting and occasionally miserable, the way all endings of long things tend to be. We divided the house in Sylvan Park. I stayed in Nashville. She moved for a time to her parents' place in Knoxville and eventually settled in a rental in Midtown Nashville, close to her office. Bryce Calloway's situation became public in June, 4 months after the anniversary dinner. The reporting was significant. His company entered a federal consent agreement. He personally faced civil charges and a period under court supervision, and his career in pharmaceutical distribution effectively ended. I don't know the current state of whatever Fiona and Bryce were to each other by that point. I don't ask. I know that Rosalind and I still talk, not as frequently, and it's different now. She carries some guilt, and I carry some gratitude, and those two things don't always sit easily together. But she is a good person who was put in an impossible position, and I believe she made the best choices available to her, even if she made one of them 6 months late. My brother Garrett came down from Louisville in the spring and stayed for a long weekend. We drove out to the Natchez Trace Parkway and walked a section of the trail near the Lipa Fork end and talked about everything and nothing the way brothers do. He didn't try to solve anything. He just showed up. That mattered more than he knows. The craftsman on the tree-lined street in Sylvan Park sold in July. I moved into an apartment in the nation's neighborhood, closer to my office on Charlotte Avenue on the 4th floor of a building where I can see the skyline to the east when I make coffee in the morning. It is quiet. It is mine. Some days that feels like freedom, and some days it just feels like quiet. I've had a lot of time to think about the question I get asked most when I tell this story. People want to know. Was I angry? Yes, I was angry. Not in the loud way, in the cold, slow way that settles into the walls of a person and takes years to come fully out. Anger at the waste of it. Not just the betrayal itself, but the 2 years of pretending, the careful maintenance of an illusion, the energy she put into building a second life while walking through the rooms of the first one like nothing was wrong. I was angry that our home in Sylvan Park, a place I genuinely loved, became something I couldn't look at the same way. That the Hermitage Hotel where we got married is just a building I drive past now. That the coffee shop on the tree-lined street where we had a standing Saturday routine is a place I still avoid 2 years later because I'm not ready for whatever I'd feel walking through that door. Anger is allowed. I want to say that clearly for anyone who is living inside something similar right now. The composed exterior is not the measure of your recovery. You are allowed to be furious. You are allowed to grieve. Both things can be true. What I chose not to do, and this is the distinction I hold on to, was let the anger become the story. I could have used what I knew about Bryce Calloway to embarrass Fiona publicly. I could have arranged far more than a quiet dinner with her sister. I have the professional skills and the professional contacts to make a person's life extremely difficult if I decide to do so. I decided not to do so. Not because Fiona didn't hurt me. She did. But because I know what I am, and I am not someone who destroys people for revenge. I'm someone who uncovers truth and lets that truth do what truth does on its own. What I want you to take from this: if you're in a marriage that has a crack running through it that you haven't examined yet, or if you're past that and sitting in the aftermath of something that dismantled your life, is this the most dangerous form of self-deception, is the kind that feels like loyalty? I told myself I trusted Fiona. I did trust her. But I also told myself when I saw that hotel charge in January that there was probably a simple explanation. And there was no simple explanation. There was a complicated one that I was not ready to look at. I chose not to look because looking felt like a betrayal of the trust I had chosen to give. That's a mistake I understand now. Trusting someone is not the same as refusing to see them clearly. You can love a person and still be willing to look directly at them, at what they are actually doing, at the gap between who you believe them to be and who they are showing themselves to be. I spent 20 years teaching other people how to look clearly at the world around them. I had to get to 45 sitting at a table at Josephine on a Thursday in March to learn how to do it for myself. I'm still learning. Some days I think I'm doing pretty well. Other days I drive past the exit for Sylvan Park and I feel the whole weight of 15 years sitting somewhere in my chest, and I drive on and I let it pass. That's the work. That's the only work that actually matters when everything else has been cleared away. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was back in my office on Charlotte Avenue reviewing security protocols for a hotel group over in the Gulch when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because that is one of the professional habits I cannot break. It was a woman named Patricia, a friend of Rosalind's, as it turned out, who'd heard enough of the story through Rosalind to want to ask me something. She was dealing with her own situation, a husband, a behavior pattern she couldn't explain, a feeling in her gut she'd been dismissing for too long. She wanted to know, she said, whether it was wrong to look more closely at what was in front of her. No, I said, it is not wrong. Looking clearly at your life is never wrong. We talked for 40 minutes. I didn't charge her. I gave her the same framework I give anyone who sits across from me and says, I think something is happening that I can't see clearly yet. Start with what you know, not what you fear, not what you assume, not what you want to believe. What do you actually know? What are the facts in front of you? Then follow those facts gently, honestly, without a conclusion already written, and be prepared for what you find, because finding out the truth, even when it is painful, is always better than living inside a comfortable version of something that isn't real. Patricia did look. She found what she suspected. Her marriage ended differently than mine, with more noise, with more conflict, with children involved, which makes everything harder in ways I was spared. But she found out. She made her decisions with full information, and 6 months after that conversation, she emailed me to say she was okay. Not happy, not whole yet, but okay. Moving forward, knowing what she knew. That email meant more to me than most things that have happened in the last 2 years. I am 45 years old, living on the 4th floor of an apartment in the Nations, making coffee in the mornings with a view of the Nashville skyline. I do work I believe in. I have my brother. I have some friendships that survived the wreckage and a few that turned out not to be friendships at all, which is its own kind of useful information. I do not know what Fiona's life looks like now. I've made a deliberate choice not to know. She is out there somewhere in this city building, whatever comes next for her. And that is between her and her conscience and whoever she has become since that Thursday evening in March. What I know is what happened at table 7 at Josephine. I know that I raised a glass to a woman who had spent 2 years dismantling our marriage piece by piece. And I meant it when I said I wished her happiness. Not because I wasn't furious, not because I wasn't in pain, but because the alternative was to let bitterness be the last thing I gave her, and she'd already taken enough. I raised the glass. I wished her well. And when the door opened and Rosalind walked through it, and the truth landed on that table between us, I didn't engineer that moment as punishment. I engineered it as honesty. The one thing I should have been given 2 years earlier and wasn't. Some things you can control, and some things you leave to the truth. The truth, in my experience, always does the work eventually. I'll be honest with you. The part that stays with me isn't what Fiona did. People make terrible choices. That's not new. What stays with me is the January morning I saw that hotel charge and told myself there was probably a simple explanation. That's the moment right there. We don't lose people all at once. We lose them in the small moments when we decide we'd rather be comfortable than clear. So, if you're sitting somewhere right now with a feeling in your gut you keep talking yourself out of, stop talking yourself out of it. You already know. You've known for a while. The question is whether you're ready to